Imagine you are 7 years old. You are asleep in your own bed, in your own home, next to your mother. And then one morning, strangers walk in and they take you away. Not to punish you. Not because you did something wrong. They take you away because you were born in a place called Sparta. And in Sparta, your own life stopped belonging to you the moment you were born. That's not the shocking part. Here's the shocking part. Before you were even a week old, a group of elders looked at your tiny, newborn body, checked you from head to toe, and decided whether you were even allowed to live. If they didn't like what they saw, your story ended before it began. And if you passed that first test, it just meant the real trial was about to start. By the time you turn 12, you will have been beaten on purpose, starved on purpose, and sent out into the wild with nothing but a cloak, told to survive or don't come back. And somehow, out of this nightmare, walked the most feared soldiers the ancient world had ever seen. Men so terrifying that just hearing the word Spartan could make an entire enemy army think twice before marching forward. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to hear about the day 300 of these men stood in a narrow mountain pass against an army so massive that ancient writers said it drank entire rivers dry just by stopping to fill their canteens. But here's the twist nobody tells you. Stay till the end, because the last part of this story is going to completely change how you think about the Spartans. And it might just change how you think about being unbeatable altogether. So today we're diving into one of the most brutal, most fascinating survival stories in human history. How the Spartans built a society designed to create warriors who never gave up, and why so many people today still believe they were never defeated. Get ready, because this isn't just a war story. This is a story about what happens when an entire civilization decides that comfort is the enemy. Let's go back about 2,700 years to a small region in southern Greece called Sparta. Life here didn't look like the rest of the ancient world. While other Greek cities were busy building theaters, writing philosophy, and trading goods across the sea, Sparta was busy building something else entirely. Soldiers. Not soldiers, the way we think of them today with a few years of training before going home. Sparta built soldiers the way you'd build a tool that was never allowed to break. Here's how strange this world really was. In most ancient societies, a father decided what happened to his child. In Sparta, that power belonged to the state. When a baby boy was born, his father would carry him to a group of tribal elders. And those elders would inspect the child like they were checking a young animal for weaknesses. Were his limbs strong? Was his body healthy? Was there any sign he might grow up frail or sickly? If the elders were not satisfied, that baby's fate was decided right then and there, and it was final. Now picture being a Spartan mother in that moment. You just gave birth. You're holding your child for the first time. And you already know that this tiny life is about to be judged by strangers, not by you. That's the world Spartan families lived in every single day. Comfort, softness, gentle upbringing. None of that was part of the plan. From the very first breath, Spartan life was about proving you were strong enough to belong. If a baby passed inspection, you might think the hard part was over. It wasn't. That baby had just qualified for a system that would push him further than almost any child in human history has ever been pushed. And here's where the story gets even wilder. At age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their homes, not sent to a school down the street where they'd come home for dinner. Taken, removed from their families completely, and placed into state-run barracks with other boys their age. Imagine that. One day you're a normal 7-year-old with a mother, a home, maybe some toys carved out of wood. The next day you belong to the state, you sleep in a group barracks, and the adults around you are not there to comfort you. They're there to toughen you. This system had a name. The Greeks called it the agoge. And it is one of the most extreme childhood training programs ever recorded in history. The entire point of the agoge was to strip away everything soft about a child and replace it with obedience, endurance, and raw physical toughness. And when I say extreme, I mean things that would shock most modern parents into disbelief. Spartan boys in the agoge were deliberately underfed, not a little bit hungry, actually hungry all the time. Why? Because hunger in the Spartan mind made a boy sharp, alert, and resourceful. But here's the part that sounds almost unbelievable. Boys were encouraged to steal food to supplement what little they were given. Stealing wasn't punished, getting caught was punished, and punished severely. Think about the lesson buried in that. It wasn't don't steal, it was don't get caught. Sparta was teaching 7, 8, 9-year-old children that survival meant being clever enough, quiet enough, and controlled enough to never get exposed. There's one story that captures this perfectly, one that's been told for thousands of years. A young Spartan boy stole a fox and hid it under his cloak to avoid being caught by his instructors. As the story goes, rather than reveal the theft and take the shame of being caught, the boy stayed completely silent, letting the fox claw and bite at his stomach underneath his clothes all the way until he collapsed. Whether every detail of that story is exactly true, or has grown a little in the retelling over the centuries, it captures exactly what Spartan society valued above almost everything else: silent endurance, no matter the cost. Now here's where I want you to pause for a second and really think about this. If you were raised in a system like this, where pain was normal, hunger was normal, and showing weakness was the one thing you could never do, what kind of person do you think you'd become by the time you were an adult? Would you become fearless? Or would you just become really, really good at hiding fear? Type your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think, because historians still debate this exact question. Let's keep going, because the agoge gets even stranger. Once a year, there was a ritual where boys would compete to steal cheese off an altar, while older instructors stood guard, whips in hand, ready to lash out at anyone caught. This wasn't background punishment. This was an actual event, almost like a public sport, where boys were expected to endure being whipped, sometimes badly, without crying out. Some accounts say boys occasionally died from the beatings, and were praised afterward for having endured with silence and honor, rather than pitied for the loss. In Sparta, dying quietly with dignity was considered a greater achievement than living while showing weakness. Around age 12, the toughening got even more physical. Boys had their hair cut short. Their clothing was reduced to a single thin cloak, meant to be worn through blazing hot summers and freezing cold winters alike, with no extra layers allowed. They went barefoot constantly, on purpose, to toughen the skin on their feet so thick that rough ground and sharp stones barely bothered them. Sleeping wasn't done on soft bedding either. Boys made their own beds from reeds they pulled from a nearby riverbank, using nothing but their bare hands to snap the reeds apart because using a knife was considered cheating the process. In the winter, they were allowed to mix in a few thistles for warmth. That's it. That was the great comfort of a Spartan winter night. Some prickly thistles mixed into river reeds. By this age, actual combat training kicked into high gear. Wrestling, running, gymnastics, spear drills, and something called the crypteia, which might be the darkest part of this entire system. Select older teenage boys, considered the most promising future soldiers, were sent out alone into the countryside with almost no supplies. Their mission wasn't survival training in the way we might imagine hiking a trail today. They were sent to enforce control over Sparta's enslaved population, known as helots, sometimes through intimidation, sometimes through violence in the middle of the night. It's a brutal, uncomfortable piece of history, and it's important context because it shows that the same system that built legendary warriors also built a society running on fear and control behind the scenes. Let's talk about food for a second, because this part genuinely surprises people. Spartan meals were not exactly something to look forward to. Full-grown Spartan men ate together in communal dining halls called messes, and the signature dish served there was something called black broth, a soup made from boiled pork, blood, salt, and vinegar. Ancient writers from other Greek cities actually made fun of this dish constantly, joking that it must take a Spartan upbringing just to be able to stomach the taste. There's a story about a visitor from another city who tried the black broth and understood immediately why Spartan soldiers were willing to die in battle. Death, he joked, must have seemed easier than eating that soup for the rest of your life. Funny as that sounds, there's something deeper hiding in it. Spartan food wasn't about pleasure, it was about function. Every part of daily Spartan life, right down to what filled your bowl at dinner, was stripped of comfort on purpose, so that comfort itself would never feel like something you needed. And here's something that might genuinely surprise you if you're picturing Sparta as a place where only men mattered. Spartan women lived lives that were shockingly different from women almost anywhere else in the ancient Greek world. While women in cities like Athens were mostly kept indoors, focused entirely on housework and rarely educated, Spartan girls were required to exercise in public, practicing running, wrestling, and even javelin throwing, because Spartans believed that strong, healthy mothers produced strong, healthy sons for the army. Spartan women were also allowed to own property, and by some ancient accounts, they controlled a surprisingly large share of the land in Sparta over time, since their husbands were away training or fighting for most of their lives. It's a strange kind of freedom born not from equality as we'd think of it today, but from the fact that the entire society existed to serve one single purpose: building better warriors. Even the women's role in that machine came with a kind of power most women elsewhere in the ancient world simply didn't have. So by the time a Spartan boy became a Spartan man, usually somewhere around age 20, he had been shaped by roughly 13 years of hunger, pain, silence, and discipline. Every soft edge had been sanded away. And here's the thing that made Sparta different from basically every other army in the ancient world. This wasn't training a soldier did for a few years and then went home to farm or trade goods. Being a warrior was the entire and only job. Spartan men didn't work regular jobs like other Greek citizens. Enslaved helots handled the farming and labor, which meant full-grown Spartan men could spend nearly every waking hour training, drilling, and preparing for war. Imagine training for your profession full-time for your entire adult life, with your entire community built around making sure nothing distracted you from becoming as dangerous as possible in battle. This is how Sparta built the phalanx, their signature battle formation, and honestly, one of the smartest pieces of ancient military engineering you'll ever hear about. Picture a wall made entirely of men. Rows of soldiers, called hoplites, standing shoulder to shoulder, each one holding a large round shield in his left hand and a spear in his right. Here's the clever part. Each soldier's shield didn't just protect himself. It covered half of the body of the man standing next to him, which meant the entire formation only worked, only survived, if every single man trusted the man beside him completely and held his position no matter what. One person breaking and running could expose the man next to him to a deadly, unprotected gap. In Sparta, running from battle wasn't just cowardice. It was seen as one of the worst things a man could possibly do, a betrayal of every single person standing beside him. That's actually where one of the most famous sayings in ancient history comes from. Spartan mothers were said to send their sons off to war with the words, "Come back with your shield," or "on it," meaning, come home victorious, carrying your shield, or come home dead, being carried on top of it. Either way, you come home with honor. There was no version of coming home having simply dropped your shield and run. Take a second and imagine hearing that from your own mother as you walked out the door. That single sentence tells you almost everything you need to know about the culture Spartans were raised inside. There's one more detail about Spartan soldiers worth knowing before we get to the battlefield, and it's a small one, but it tells you a lot about how deliberately this whole system was designed. Spartan warriors wore bright red cloaks into battle, not for style. The color red was chosen because it hid bloodstains from wounds, meaning a wounded Spartan soldier could keep fighting without the sight of his own blood, visibly weakening the courage of the men standing beside him, and without giving the enemy the satisfaction of seeing him bleed. Every single detail, from the color of a cloak to the recipe of a soup, was engineered around one obsession: never let weakness show, ever, in any form. Now let's get to the story most people already have some idea about, even if they don't know the real details. The Battle of Thermopylae in the year 480 BC. This is the story behind that famous number, 300. A massive Persian army, led by the Emperor Xerxes, was marching into Greece, and ancient writers described the invading force as so enormous that some accounts claimed it numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Modern historians think those ancient numbers were exaggerated, but even by conservative estimates, the Persian army vastly outnumbered the Greek defenders. Sparta's king Leonidas led a small advance force to a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, which literally translates to the hot gates. Here's an important detail most movies leave out. It wasn't only 300 Spartans standing there. Leonidas brought roughly 300 Spartan soldiers, but they were joined by thousands of allied Greek troops, including 700 soldiers from a city called Thermopylae and 400 from Thebes. Altogether, something close to 7,000 Greek fighters gathered to block that narrow passage against an invading force that outnumbered them dramatically. Why choose a narrow mountain pass? Because it neutralized the Persian numbers advantage almost completely. In that tight space, only so many enemy soldiers could physically reach the Greek line at once, no matter how massive the army behind them was. For 2 full days, the Greek forces, with Spartans at the very core of the formation, held that pass and repelled wave after wave of Persian attacks. Imagine the sound of that. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers pushing forward, and this thin wall of shields and spears simply refusing to break. Then on the 3rd day, something happened that changed everything. A local resident betrayed the Greeks, revealing a hidden mountain path that let Persian soldiers circle completely around behind the defenders. Leonidas realized what was coming. His force was about to be surrounded on both sides. So he made a decision that turned this battle into legend. He sent most of the allied Greek soldiers away to survive and fight another day, while he and his 300 Spartans, alongside the 700 soldiers from Thermopylae, who refused to leave, stayed behind to hold the line and buy time. They knew, almost certainly, that staying meant death, and they stayed anyway. On that final day, surrounded from both sides, the Spartans and Thespians fought until every single one of them was killed, not most of them, all of them. This is the moment that carved the word Spartan into history forever. Not because they won this specific battle, because by every practical measure they didn't, but because of what their sacrifice represented. Their stand at Thermopylae bought crucial time for other Greek forces to prepare, and it became a symbol so powerful that it inspired Greek resistance for the rest of the war, a war the Greeks ultimately won. Here's a question I want you to really sit with for a second. If you knew, with absolute certainty, That staying somewhere meant you would die, but leaving would save your own life while risking everyone counting on you? Which one do you think you'd choose? Drop your honest answer in the comments below.